Well, good afternoon. My name is Jonathan Miller. I'm the pastor at the Vine Church here in Midtown Sacramento. We are hosting our next theology pub this next Tuesday night. LGBTQ plus is not a sin, confronting Christian abuse. Now, this is an intense topic, and there's a lot of theology behind it. But these theology pubs are a place where we tell a lot of stories and we hear grief from the community and we share our grief back as we wrestle with these things in a post-evangelical context. They are not meetings where we're going to dive into detailed theology, though, quite frankly, we do touch on some important things. However, this theology is important. The Bible is our guidepost. Even as post-evangelicals, we hold the Bible to be our guidepost for truth as we encounter God's love and wrestle with our faith in Jesus Christ. So we want to have the theology available online before Tuesday night so people maybe can watch it ahead of time, or even Tuesday night we can reference things that people, when they leave, can go back and watch or read. So this took a couple years. Created about a 76-page theological document wrestling with this topic entitled God Affirms, okay, that really wrestles with God's affirmation of LGBTQ plus within the Bible. So you can read that document now. It is on our church Facebook page, the Vine Church Midtown Sacramento. It is on my Facebook page, Jonathan Miller. It's on the church website, the Vine Church of Sacramento. You can find me on Medium with the article. This is Jonathan M. So feel free to read that article. These videos, and I want to keep these to 5 to 7 minute at most. I'm going to do about 4 videos where we're going to look at the 7 Bible verses that don't mean what you were taught. Once again, the 7 Bible verses that don't mean what you were taught. I'm going to hit these quick and dirty. If you want more detailed, you're going to read that article. But this is still really important. There are 7 biblical verses that are essentially used by the Christian world for centuries now to condemn LGBTQ plus personhood and relations. The problem is these passages do not mean what we assume on first glance they mean. I have 2 degrees in theology, master's in divinity, master's in theology from Fuller Theological Seminary. I'm also not standing alone in this. There are wonderful scholars such as Sarah Rudin and David Gushy who are wrestling with these topics, and I rely a lot on their works as I compile this, though some of this is my own also. So let's look at the first 3 of these in the Old Testament. The first reference to same-sex relations really is not a reference to mutual sex between 2 consenting partners at all. It's an insult to include this passage in this discussion, but as conservative scholarship, evangelicals do use this passage, we have to confront it. Genesis 19. Genesis 19 is the Sodom and Gomorrah story. 2 angels arrive in the towns of Sodom and Gomorrah to see Lot, Abraham's nephew, and a traveling companion. Lot recognizes the angels as such. Okay, these angels appear to be, if they are consistent with other biblical passages, bathed in white and quite beautiful. All of the men of the town surround the house and demand Lot send the angels, who these men call men, out so that they might rape them. The angels are aghast, tell Lot to flee with their family, that they're going to destroy the town, which they do. Likely, these men of Sodom are heterosexual men who assert their dominance through rape. Just an FYI, Jude 6-8 in the Bible and 2 Peter 2, 6-7 appear to reinforce a condemnation of same-sex. They do not. David Gushy's research is very clear that those New Testament passages talking about Genesis 19 are really condemning sex with angels. Okay? Now, Ezekiel 16:49 states that the sin of Sodom was being overfed, unconcerned. They did not help the poor and needy. Essentially, they were abusive men. Okay? Genesis 19 has no place in this discussion. It is about men wanting to violate angels, but also, if they believe these angels are men, other men, not anything mutual or loving. Next one is Leviticus 18:22. Leviticus 18:22 states, "Do not have sexual relations with a man as one does with a woman. That is detestable." Okay. Now, Yes, a plain reading of this seems to indicate that a man having sex with another man is detestable to God. However, there are major, and I mean major, issues of culture in play here. Okay? We do not disregard the Old Testament completely, but we recognize we are not under Old Testament covenant. If we accepted the Old Testament covenant, we would all have to stone each other for working on Saturdays, which is the Sabbath. We would have to execute people for eating shellfish. Now, what a lot of Christians say is that those silly laws, like I just said, about working on the Sabbath, don't count, but the sexual ones do, because Jesus makes a reference to sexual immorality, referencing Leviticus 18 and a few other passages. Well, that's a problem. Leviticus 18 is absolutely about sexual sins, and it has instructions such as do not dishonor your father by having sex with your mother, do not have sex with your sister, your father's wife, your father's daughter, do not have sex with your son's daughter or your daughter's daughter, as that would dishonor you. Okay? All sorts of family relations are mentioned in this Leviticus 18 chapter. Many of these issues are forbidden due to issues of honor. Okay? Do not have sexual relations with your neighbor's wife and defile yourself with her. So please note what we're talking about here. This chapter, Leviticus 18, is speaking to and allowing essentially a polyamorous and even further sexually hedonistic culture. It is the presumption of the text that the reader, probably a married man, is having extensive sex with any number of women he chooses, not in the bounds of marriage, and thus the text is giving these men basic guidance rules that his own relatives and his friends' wives are out of bounds. It also fully accepts polygamy, 18:18, but then demands you just don't marry two sisters. Okay? This Leviticus 18 goes on to prohibit approaching a woman for sex during her monthly period, and then prohibit sacrificing one's child to Moloch in an act of child sacrifice. Okay? So in one chapter, child sacrifice, having sex with a woman during her period, and then same sex is prohibited, while polygamy, polyamory, and wanton sex with multiple partners is allowed as long as you're not directly related to them. Okay? That passage, you have to look at an entire chapter, a passage, fully. You can't pick and choose a verse like we Christians do with 18:22 to say, well, this is bad. See what Leviticus 18:22 says. No, Leviticus 18 is a passage of guidance from God to a very broken culture in a period of time thousands upon thousands of years ago. It is not meant to be binding today. It is not meant to be instructions today. If you take it as instructions, you're going to have young adults in your church that actually will start to argue that polyamory is acceptable to God because look at what Leviticus 18 does. Let that chapter go. Leviticus 20:13 is equally difficult. Also in the Holiness Code, a plain reading says, if a man has sexual relations with a man, as one does with a woman, both of them have done what is detestable. They are to be put to death. Their blood will be on their own heads. Okay? This is also the famous chapter that declares anyone who curses their father or mother shall be put to death. If a man commits adultery with another man's wife, they are to be put to death. If a man has sex with a woman during her period, they are to be exiled. The chapter goes on and on to discuss who you can and can't have sex with. Of course, once again, a tacit endorsement of polygamy and the like. Okay? Credible scholarship, a credible theological way to look at a biblical text. You can't take one verse in a larger passage out of context and say this one applies, but the rest of these don't. So if we want to hold Leviticus 20:13 correctly, as if this is guidance from God for now, then we're also saying someone who commits adultery should be put to death. Someone who curses their mother or father should be put to death. we're saying that having sex in a woman's period, you are kicked out of the church and exiled. And it's a tacit endorsement of polygamy again. So let's just accept that Leviticus 20, along with Leviticus 18, was guidance from God in a very broken culture. And there's more too. In the paper, I expand on this a lot. You know, the Israelites were in a time of the wandering in the desert, and they were very concerned about birth rates. So a lot of these instructions, when you start to look at them in context, you start to understand that what they are deeply concerned about is birth of children, fertility concerns. It's also an issue where, when you look at men with men, which Leviticus 18 and Leviticus 20 also references, the ancient Near East of this time, as we're going to talk about when we get to the New Testament a lot, the ancient Near East, men violating other men as a work of power was common. The Israelites had been slaves in Egypt. They were probably violated as slaves. Men were violated probably. And now they may be doing that to their slaves, who they've brought with them, and or who they encounter. And that is probably what God is condemning, but we just accept that Leviticus 18 and 20, if you take these two verses, then you need to take the chapter, and then we have a whole other list of issues going on, because the chapters are absolutely contradicted by other biblical passages later on. The last Old Testament reference, I don't even count it as part of the, well, no, I guess it is counted as part of the 7. Judges 19. We're not going to get into Judges 19. It's eerily similar to Sodom in Genesis 19. Travelers are welcomed into an old man's home. The wicked men demand the traveler come out. They can have sex with them. As with Sodom, this has nothing to do with consenting same-sex adults. It is quite insulting to compare this to 2 men and 2 women in a mutual relationship. It's a little creepy that the church actually thinks this applies here. This is part 1, the Old Testament passages. Thank you.